Now, Maganomics won the 2013 award for Best Research by a National Association, and among the category winners, it was voted the overall winner. So I would like to invite Marius to come up and take us through his presentation.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Over the last 2 days, you've seen some really good presentations which highlight how our businesses are changing, the exciting new opportunities that lie ahead of us, and more importantly, all of the new revenue streams that are opening up to our businesses. It's my privilege, however, to share with you this morning some conclusive evidence which really shows that advertising in printed magazines remain one of the most powerful tools at the disposal of an advertiser. So Maganomics is really the culmination of 4 different studies that we completed. Firstly, we did Magnify, which was a study that looked in isolation at how magazines influence consumers through the consumer journey. We then worked with Mindshare and an analytical agency called OHEL to flesh this out a little bit further to understand how magazines work with other media. And there's 3 pieces of work we did with them. Firstly, we looked at how magazines influence brand metrics. Then we looked at how to really measure magazines effectively in econometric modeling and what the ROI is for the medium. And then finally, we investigated how your level of investment in any channel will impact on your performance. So at the heart of all of this work is understanding how magazines drive consumers through the consumer journey. Now, it's well known that big media like TV and online are particularly effective at creating awareness very quickly. Mass audiences, your message is delivered very quickly. But awareness in itself isn't really enough to get consumers to buy your product or service. There are a number of steps that you need to drive them through. Research, creating a short list of products and services at their disposal to consider, and then finally helping them to make that purchase decision. And there's lots of research that shows that magazines are really terrific at getting consumers to bond with products and get them to that final stage of the consumer journey. Now, magazines have always been very hospitable when it comes to advertising environments. People view advertising as part and parcel of the overall package. It's not screened out as we do with TV or online advertising. And Magnify really looked at a large scale at quantifying this phenomenon. So we interviewed more than 18,000 people across 96 different magazine brands to see how they respond to both advertising and editorial content. And what we found was that people were equally likely to remember a piece of advertising as they were to remember a piece of editorial that they were shown. So really strong, conclusive evidence that people are not screening out advertising in magazines, they're viewing it as part of the overall package. And if we then look at how likely people are to take an action based on their exposure to either of these types of content, we again found that levels of action were very similar for both advertising and editorial. So we then took all of this information that we had, all of these actions that people can take on the back of exposure, and we plotted it across the consumer journey. And what we saw was that magazines are really terrific at getting people engaged in the content. We saw that we're driving people to go and research products or services, getting more information, sharing that information. We're able to change the way people view brands. But obviously for any advertiser, this last piece is the most crucial evidence, whether or not we drive people towards purchase or considering a product. And here we see quite a deviation in performance between advertising and editorial. Now, if there's an editor in a room, I normally get some angry looks. How dare I imply that editorial isn't as effective as advertising in driving action? But of course, not all editorial will be related to a product or service. And my favorite example here is an article that we measured in Marie Claire entitled, "Why I Murdered My Husband with an Axe." So if you suddenly had a huge number of people claiming, yes, I went out and I bought that product, you're probably going to be a little bit nervous around readers of Marie Claire. But we can really see a terrific outcome there for advertisers. 9% of respondents claiming that they've gone out to purchase the product that they've seen advertised, and 22% of them claiming that they've considered purchasing this product. So really conclusive evidence that magazines drive consumers through the purchase funnel. But of course, what we wanted was a bit of perspective about how we do this relative to other media. And that's where we turn to Mindshare. So Firstly, we looked at a study called Brand Z. It's an international study conducted by Millward Brown, and it's used by all of the WPP group's creative and buying agencies. And one of the key outputs that we looked at in this study is the bonding pyramid. Now, this is really just the inverse model of the consumer journey. So at the bottom, you've got presence, which is awareness, and then you go up through the various phases. So you've got relevance, you've got performance, you've got advantage. So this is all where consumers assess a product or service where it's suitable. And at the very top of this pyramid, we've got bonding. Now, that's the crucial one that we looked at, because Millward Brown found that there's an extremely high correlation between bonding with a product and the amount of money that you're going to spend on that. And in fact, they found that consumers will spend about 38% of their spend in any particular category on the products that they've got the highest level of bonding with. So there's a high share of wallet that comes with getting consumers to bond with your product or service. So we isolated all of the brands that advertise a magazine. So from 20 categories, we found 14 categories that use magazines, and we looked at 136 brands. So by looking at that, we can see how consumers are bonding with various brands or products, and by combining it with advertising spend figures from Nielsen, we can start understanding how investment in any particular channel can affect your bonding scores. So what we found was that on average, magazines attracted about 7% of the advertising spend. So what we wanted to understand is what happens to your bonding scores once you start increasing your level of investment. So we looked at advertisers who spent 20% above that average and compared it to people who invest in magazines at a lower level. And what we found was that with campaigns of a value of up to £2 million, we saw a 25% rise in bonding scores. If we then look at campaigns with a value of between £2 and £10 million, we see that those bonding scores increased by 72%. So really magnificent proof here that magazines are terrific at getting consumers to bond with products or brands. And one of my prime examples that I like to use is P&G's Aussie brand, a brand nobody in Australia has ever heard about. But this is a relatively new brand in the United Kingdom, and they've been very heavy investors in magazines. And in factual fact, they've spent more than 80% of their budget in magazines since 2007. So if we look at the lower four tiers, we can see there's been some good momentum for them. So really good proof that magazines can actually help create a brand. But the thing that we wanted to look at, what happened to their bonding scores once they started investing heavily in magazines? And what we found was that in this period, their bonding scores more than doubled because they were using such a heavy magazine schedule. So when we look at brand equity, which is sort of the soft metrics, how you influence people's perceptions about brands or products, magazines do a terrific job. But we also wanted to look at how magazines perform for the bottom line. So what do you actually get back for your investment within magazines? And in order to explain this to you, I have to use the most complicated chart I've ever used in my life. It's really the easiest way of doing it. So what you're seeing on screen right now is two axes, one representing sales and the other representing time, and a series of gray lines which each represent 1 week in time. And that is your measured level of base sales. So if consumers didn't get any new messages or any impetus to change their choices, that is the level of sales you could expect for any particular product. But that's not the world we live in. Your actual sales pattern will look like this. It will be up and down and all over the place. And the role of econometric modeling is really to understand what's causing those differences. So it fills in the gaps for us. And there's obviously a lot of things that can influence it. Price, promotional activity, in-store, and obviously media. So all of these activities will help a brand or a service to boost their level of sales. But obviously their competitors are going to be doing the same thing, and that's all going to be negative drivers. So looking at it more simply, what we wanted to understand was how above-the-line media, all of those yellow blocks, drive sales performance for brands. Now, MEC and Mindshare have done a lot of work in this area, and they've calculated that about 10% of sales is delivered by above-the-line media. So we wanted to understand what magazines' role in that was. And in investigating all of these models, we found that there were 3 critical things that had to be present in econometric modeling to measure magazines appropriately. Now, it's not a criticism of econometric models. They're all designed individually for clients, but these are the things that are absolutely essential if you want to get a good reading on magazines. Firstly, we're often bundled together with national press. Now, the way we deliver our audiences is very different. National press gives you an immediate burst, and magazines deliver their audiences in a much more leisurely process. In fact, it takes about 4 weeks for a monthly magazine to deliver 81% of its audience. So as such, it's essential that you use appropriate media inputs. And here we're specifically talking about accumulation data. So it's data that's available in most readership surveys, which shows you how you deliver your audiences over the longer term. And then finally, we found that often magazines get such a low weighting or share of spend that it's really impossible to isolate their contribution. So the guidelines that we worked with was that you needed at least a 5% share of the media budget or 500,000 spend. So we took all of this data and we looked at the difference between using accumulation data and not using accumulation data. And we looked at 5 FMCG campaigns in particular. And what we found was that on average, magazine ROI is understated by 19% if you don't use accumulation data. Now, this isn't spending more money with magazines, it's not changing your schedule, it's just accounting for how we deliver audiences. So immediately a big boost to our performance once you've got the right data in place. We then took all of this knowledge and we applied it to 77 different campaigns with a media spend of up to £6 million. And what we found was that magazines showed the strongest performance of any media. In fact, our ROI was 11% higher than TV and 22% higher than online. Now, I'll be honest with you, I was disappointed with this outcome. I was hoping for a nice, solid second or third place. And that's simply because as soon as you walk into an agency with this sort of data, they're going to say to you, well, of course you're going to say that, you work in magazines. So normally in an econometric model study, you would put your hands up in victory at this point and declare yourself the winner. But we knew we had to dig a little bit deeper. So we went back to Mindshare and we said, all right, we know we are terrific at getting people to bond with our products and brands. But what else is at play here? Why have we got these terrific ROI figures? And in order to understand this, we looked at diminishing return curves. Now, the basic theory behind diminishing return curves is that when you first start spending in any medium, you get a huge boost in your sales performance. And media will deliver this boost to sales in different ways and at different speeds. So if you're a media planner, you're probably going to use this blue medium first because it's going to give you the biggest, most economic uplift in sales. And what I want you to notice is when you first start, there's very little wastage. So you're generating massive amount of sales at a very high ROI. But then as the campaign starts maturing, your return starts to level out. So what we see on the screen there are sort of the first blue dot and the first yellow dot shows where the optimal level of spend is before your ROI really starts dropping off. So as a media planner or buyer, if you're going to do this, you're going to put your money into the blue medium first, and then let's say you get an additional 100,000 that you want to invest. And I realize advertisers never throw more money at you after the fact, but just work with me on the theory here. You're probably not going to invest it in the blue medium because the blue medium has delivered as much as it can. You're probably going to put it into the yellow medium here because the yellow medium is going to give you twice the sales uplift that the blue medium will give you. So using this model, we return to those 5 FMCG campaigns that we looked at earlier. And what you see on the screen are 4 medias being used. We've got terrestrial TV in yellow, we've got satellite TV in brown, we've got outdoor in blue, and we've got magazines in pink. Now, if you look at the 2 TV schedules, they're invested at a really good level, just before your returns start flattening out. Outdoor's a bit more of a difficult creature to pick that spot, but also invested at a really good level there. But look at where magazines are. This advertiser has tapped into a fraction of the sales power that magazines can deliver. And we saw this to be consistent across all of the campaigns that we looked at. So in effect, magazine ROI is high because our level of investment is low. People aren't giving us enough money to deliver the full sales potential that we can give. So turning back to those 5 campaigns, we started playing around with the budget allocation. And we increased the magazine budget by 10, 20, and 30% by taking away money from other host media. Now, magazines not only recuperated the sales lost from taking money away from other media, but it actually gave us an additional sales uplift of 1%, 1.9%, and 2.6% respectively. Now, these don't sound like massive numbers, but if you see it in the context of above-the-line media only contributing 10% of your sales uplift, That's quite an impressive performance we're delivering there. So we had one last cheeky question left for Mindshare. If our ROI is so high, because our investment level is so low, at what point will your ROI start dropping off if you increase your budget to match the ROI delivered by TV? And what we found was at the very least, magazine budgets had to be doubled before magazine ROI dropped to the same level as TV. So we really offer advertisers a very low-risk, high-yield strategy by offering them magazine advertising. So in summary, what we found in Maganomics is that magazines are terrific at getting consumers closer to brands. And brands who are heavy investors in magazines enjoy higher bonding scores. We also saw that it's really easy to underestimate magazine ROI. You need to make sure that all of those elements are in place if you want to measure magazines appropriately. And once they're in place, we know from these 77 studies that magazine ROI is proven to be higher than that for any other media channel, and that before our ROI starts dropping off to the same level as TV, you have to at least double your investment in magazine advertising. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Maganomics.